In this lesson, we're going to talk about a few tips and techniques that we can utilize to help our modeling skills. Alright, so in this first example, you can see that we have two planes here with this kind of S shape that's protruding out of it. Now you'll notice on this one, the shape is nice and smooth, and on this one it gets a little bit chunky down here on this bevel. Let's go up to Display, Heads Up Display, and we're going to go into the poly count so we can see what these two objects are doing. Now if we click on this first one, you can see that this has 25,600 faces. Obviously that's a lot of faces, especially for something that is as simple as this. But what you can see is if we zoom in here, some of these faces we're getting kind of this diamond shape going against the direction that this geometry is flowing. And that's why we're getting all of this kind of chunkiness going on here. Now if we go to this one, we have 64 faces. That's obviously a massive difference between the two of these. And look at how much better this one ultimately looks. So the rule of thumb here is we want to make sure that we have an edge that corresponds with every changing direction on this surface. That could be a valley in something, it could be a peak like this one, or even an area like this where this comes straight across and then changes direction. So you want to make sure that you're representing all of those forms and in perfect flow with the direction that the geometry is moving. So clearly a massive difference between the two of those. Alright, let's go ahead and turn off our poly count so we don't have to see that up there. And let's move over to this one. So this object, if we look at both of these, we'll see that it's essentially one big face that was extruded up and then scaled in. So we're kind of getting like a pyramid shape on this. This one as well, we have this outer edge, we've got this inside one here. The difference obviously is what's happening in the corners. So this one you can see that the geometry runs straight through that way, and the geometry runs straight through on this one. Where this one we're just going from corner to corner. So this is a scenario that you'll run into where you need to decide what to do when you come off of this corner. Do I go through that way, or do I come down at an angle like this one? So the deciding factor is what's going to happen to your geometry after the fact. Sometimes it's easier to get bevels on stuff when you're going diagonal like this. But this one, what you'll notice is when I start to rotate this, watch this corner right here. Once we get to a certain point where this line goes over itself, then we lose the shape because we don't have that diagonal line that we have on this one. Notice these ones are perfect. So we have a face here that's turning concave this direction, and Maya doesn't know what to do with it. So it has trouble displaying that. It's going to have trouble with everything. You don't want to do this in a deformation area. So, very simply, we could go in and we could split from there to there and there to there and then delete these, and we would end up with this shape in general. So, two different methods that we can go about bringing that off the corners. And once we start building a little bit more, you'll see where this could actually be beneficial, just not in this scenario. Alright, so moving on to these, we need to talk about smoothing a little bit. Now, smoothing can mean a lot of different things. Inside of Maya here, we can click on an object and we can just hit the 3 key to see what it looks like when it smooths out. Now, you would never do that in a production environment when you're rendering. We just use it inside of the viewport here just to get an overall idea of what our geometry looks like when it's smoothed. So let's talk about what is actually happening to this object a little bit. We've got this point right here, and when we tell it to smooth, what it's doing is it's averaging itself against all of its neighboring vertices. That would be this one over here, and this one. So when it averages, it pulls itself that way, and that way, and that way to average between all of those. And you can see that if I grab, say, this point and I hit the 2 key, the 2 key is going to show us the smooth version, plus it's going to show us the cage that it originally started with. And you can see this point moved itself to over there. It indeed went that direction, and that direction, and that direction. So when this point is looking for neighboring vertices, if it has to go a great length to find a neighboring vertice, it's going to average itself a lot more. So the shorter the distance this has to go to find a neighboring vertice, the least distance it's going to end up traveling. All right, so let's take a look at this next one over here. And you can see this one, I've added a center line in all directions, so we now have 4 faces on each side as opposed to just 1. But the important thing here is if you look at this vertice, it's only going to have to travel a little bit to find a neighboring one. It's not looking all the way over here now, it's only looking here. So it's going to travel a lot less to average itself out. So let's grab this one and hit 3, and let's hit 3 on this one now. And you can see it holds the shape a little bit better. We're starting to get more of a blocky shape with a big round bevel on it. All right, let's come over to this one. And you'll see on this one and the following one, what I've done is rather than doing a center line, I've put one on each edge here. And then on this one I put one on each edge as well, but I just made them a lot closer together. And so if I take all of these now and I hit 3, you can see what happens. The one where the edges were very close, it's averaging to right here, but it has a lot less distance to travel in order to average that vert out. And so we're getting a larger bevel on this one where they were more spread out. We're getting a tighter bevel on this one where they were nice and close. So there's a look at what's happening in the smoothing process and what's actually happening when it's smoothing. But again, do keep in mind that we're just hitting the 3 key just for an approximation of what's going on here, of what it's going to look like when it smooths. But when it actually smooths at render time, that's going to be your render engine that's doing that. That could either be Mental Ray or RenderMan or Arnold or whatever engine you're using. They all have a special node in there that will enable you to smooth these things down. All right, let's talk about volume loss a little bit. We saw over in this one how much volume we lost. This was a pretty big cube, and once it averaged itself out, it actually got fairly small. So over here we have 3 tubes. We've got this one with 4 sides, this one has 6 sides, this one has 8 sides, and this one has 12 sides. So let's take a look at all of these and what they do when we smooth these. So I'll hit 3, and let's go to our top view so we can see this a little bit better. And you can see what happens here. The one where we only had just a few sides on it, we lost quite a bit of volume on this. Let me turn my grid off so you can see better. Yeah, so you can see quite a bit of volume loss here. Once we went to 6 sides, we lost quite a bit less. So here's just our 4 sides, there's 6 sides. And as we go on, we had 8, and finally we have 12 on this one, and we're losing a lot less. So obviously, if you had a cylinder like this that had 100 spans, you'd probably lose hardly any. Although it's very impractical to go in and have 100 spans on this. That's just a lot of geometry that's not necessarily needed. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to compensate for these a little bit, where we're going to have this volume loss. If it's very important that we keep this actual shape here, then we're going to want to scale this up a little bit so that when it smooths, it's actually the correct size. You can see that it's fairly big now, but once we hit 3, then it looks quite nice in there. All right, in this one, we have 3 objects, and I'm going to go ahead and mesh separate these so we have individual pieces for these. Now, if we look at these just straight on, they all look absolutely the same. This one might be a little bit smaller, but that's okay. The point is we're getting a nice even shading across this whole thing. If we hit the 3 key on these, now we're getting, the same thing, nice even shading on there. Now, the reason that we're getting nice even shading here is because we have all of the normals softened. So all of these edges are soft, and it's giving us a nice shading all the way through here. And this is great, But where this breaks down is areas like this. You can see the actual faceting on it when we see the profile right here. So what you need to do is you need to kind of gauge what your object is and how close you're going to end up seeing it before you determine how much geometry we actually need. Generally speaking, tube shapes like this don't need a whole lot of geometry. If we go to right here, there's absolutely no telling the difference between any of these. And I think this one has like 50 spans in it, and this one has 8 spans in it. So we can't tell the difference between those. So for example, if you had a cord or a wire or something coming from this object to this object, there's no need for this much geometry in there. That's just overkill. This one with 8 is a great number to start with. If it's a really small wire, you could go with 6 sides. That would still produce a nice even round shape. If it's very small, I would even go down to 4. It's not going to generate a perfect circle on the profile of this, but you won't be able to tell if it's just nice and small. So 4 sides would be plenty for something like that. So you need to really keep in mind how much geometry you're adding on stuff like this. And try to keep the poly count down on those. Alright, so there's a look at a few tips and tricks that we have for getting our meshes to look better. Now in the next section we're going to go through and talk about a little bit of troubleshooting issues with our polygon objects. See you in the next lesson.